Hello, this is Scottish Independence podcast number 112, and this time I was very happy to speak to Jim Sillars. I'm pretty sure you don't need an introduction or an explanation to tell you who Jim Sillars is, so we'll just go straight into the interview this time. The only thing is, as usual, please try and get this out on Twitter and Facebook and everywhere you can to as many people as possible. Speak to you next time. Hi Jim, how's it going?
Well, it's okay at the moment. The book that I've managed to get published selling reasonably well, and more importantly is seeming to have some effect on the necessary debate that will have to be held post the referendum.
Yeah, so we'll go straight into it with the book. In Place of Failure, what's the basic premise of the book?
It seems obvious to me. It doesn't matter what human event you're talking about. If there's a contest, somebody loses and somebody wins. I think it's very sensible for the loser to sit down and say, well, actually what happened? Why didn't we win? Why did we lose? And I was expecting other people to engage in that examination over the last 12 months. They didn't do so. So I thought, well, I'll do it. Somebody has to do it. I mean, I'm hoping that other people will have a look at how the Yes campaign was conducted, where the policy areas were that we were not too good at answering the claims from Better Together.
What do you think was the main areas that lost the referendum?
Well, the first one is one that people have not noticed. In January 2014, independence stood at 29% in the opinion polls. And we went from 29 to around 45 plus due to the independence campaign. Now, there's a lesson in that for us. The reason it was only at 29% in January 2014 is, and this will come as a surprise to many people, from 1992 until 2014, the SNP actually never fought an independence campaign. Never once in those years, at elections or by-elections, did they say to people, we want you to vote for us because we believe in independence and because you believe in independence. They hedged and dodged. You get all the stuff about a strong voice for Scotland at Westminster and all that sort of thing. But the failure to campaign consistently for independence, which means educating the people as you go along with that campaign, put us at 29% and a serious disadvantage going into the referendum campaign. That's a lesson we have to learn. There hasn't been an independence campaign since last September either. And we can't go into 2016, 2017, 2018 without a consistent independence campaign, either fought by the SNP or fought by a rejuvenated Yes campaign. We're going to start off at a much higher base next time, 45%, and it'll be much easier from there to get to the 55, 60% that we'll actually need to win.
Do you feel that change in the polls from 29 to 45 was caused by the effectiveness of the official Yes campaign, or do you feel that it was the effectiveness of all these grassroots groups that sprung up around the referendum time and really made a big difference?
Oh, the real difference came from the grassroots. I mean, the spontaneous getting together of people in localities. Very often people who'd never in their lives been involved in any political activity, had never organised anything, went through a very, very quick learning curve. And I've got no doubt about it at all, that it was the effective local campaigns that really mattered, because they got onto the doorstep in their thousands. And also, they helped in what was perhaps the greatest self-education movement Scotland has ever seen. So I think, the credit goes to them. And that was one of the strengths of the campaign. Now, earlier you asked me, where did we fall down? I think there were probably three areas of weakness that were exploited by Better Together. I identify 11 of their claims, but I think there were three main areas of weakness. One was the currency. One was the position of the European Union, and the other was in the question of NATO and defence and what do we do then. The principal of those was the currency, and I've got no doubt of that at all. if you go for a currency union, and there was technical merits in what Alex Salmond and the Fiscal Commission said, that it was as much in the interests of Westminster as it was in Scotland to have a currency union. But they left out the politics when they came to that conclusion, because George Osborne was bound to say no, even if he had to say no after the vote if we won, but he was bound to say no to any currency union, thereby creating total uncertainty in people's minds about, well, how are you going to get your pay? How are we going to get our pensions? What currency is going to be used? We shifted, when the white paper went for a currency union, we shifted the initiative to the other side, and they used it very effectively. The EU was a case in point where preparation hadn't been done for proper negotiations. I mean, we got ambiguous statements coming from some parts of the EU and rather franker statements from the likes of Spain saying you'll be put out and you'll have to wait at the back of the queue to get back in. Now, if, as some of us argued beforehand, the Scottish Government had talked to the European Free Trade Association group, Iceland, Norway and Liechtenstein about possible entry, then we would have had a fallback position, and we'd also have a better negotiating position with the EU. The third one, defence, I think we sort of didn't really examine too deeply whether or not NATO was a good thing for us. And I think we allowed people to get very frightened that we'd be left defenceless, as it were.
What do you think about the defence that probably some of the higher people in the SNP would make about the NATO thing, that they were trying not to frighten the horses, they were trying to make it acceptable that Scotland became independent, and if they would come out of NATO it would have made more powerful enemies?
Yeah, well, actually, at the time the party took the NATO decision, I agreed with Alex Salmond and Angus Robertson. I thought if we said we'll stay in NATO, that might keep NATO out of the debate from the no side point of view. We were all wrong. I think we made, I'm as much in terms of guilt on that as anyone else. We made a mistake. In my book, I've had a far deeper examination of Scotland's defence needs. I mean, for example, who would be our enemies today if we were independent? Where's the state that would threaten invasion of Scotland? There isn't one. I mean, we may have a problem with Islamic terrorism, the same as every other country in Western Europe, but that doesn't require the same configuration of your armed forces as does a country which is threatened by other states. So I've had a deeper look and come to the conclusion the best thing for us to say is, well, NATO doesn't want us. Fine, we don't need NATO. We should really opt for neutrality.
It's not done Switzerland any harm.
No, and it hasn't done Ireland any harm either. I mean, it doesn't mean you don't have armed forces, because Ireland has contributed very significantly to United Nations peacekeeping, and I would hope that we would perhaps perform that kind of role in future. That's the kind of role that small countries and neutral countries can actually perform and contribute to, that larger countries which have a stake in world power actually cannot do.
Just to go back to something you said earlier, the thing with Spain making stronger statements, that you've seen Cameron in recent days making stronger statements or similar statements about Catalonia. It seems that the Spanish government and the British government are sort of thick as thieves in this because they've got a similar problem going on with Scotland and Catalonia.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see what happens if Catalonia calls their bluff. I mean, I think it's inconceivable that the European Union would expel some of its citizens, because the people in Catalonia are citizens of the EU under the Treaty of Lisbon. Now, the EU spends a great deal of money preaching to the rest of the world through its aid programme that the best thing in life is democracy, and as long as you have fair elections and properly conducted and there's no hanky-panky and no corruption, then the decision at the ballot box should be respected. Now, if the Catalonians go through that, I mean, the European Union is going to look intensely hypocritical if they say, but that doesn't apply inside the boundary of the European Union. So it'd be very interesting to see whether the Catalans vote yes, and the bluff is then called and what the response will be.
Absolutely. It's going to be very interesting to watch it. But you called earlier, and in the book you talked about making a new Yes campaign, and you think this is crucial. But now, since the referendum, a lot of the different groups are running their own campaigns. It's sort of splintered. We've got the Commonweal, we've got Rise, there's Women for Independence, and there is a bit of cross-fertilisation. But how can we bring all these different groups into the same sort of umbrella?
I think this is very important now. I mean, I've been happily surprised since the book was published and the emails have come into me about the number of local Yes campaigns that have actually sustained themselves and have kept going. I mean, I'm going to Clydebank tomorrow, Saturday, for really what is a Yes conference, and I'm going up to the following weekend. I'm up in Fort William, where the Yes groups have got events on. I think we need now to consider how we can put together a central organisation that produces coordination and coherence to that movement that's still there, but a bit splintered at the present time, where everybody's doing, in a sense, their own thing. I think it's great that everybody's there, but I think we've got to come to a joint position and joint agreement on timing of campaigns and how we actually do campaign, where we get the information from. That sort of thing, I think we need a central organisation. I don't mean one that commands people, but one that people can identify with, can give some degree of direction and can get some agreement on timetabling parts of the campaign that we unleash upon the public.
Do you think it should be a democratic organisation?
I would like to see it put together with representatives of the groups which took a very active part. I mean, you actually have the basis of it just now, in the sense there was an advisory board, and you can ask them to come back, as it were, but also increase the numbers of that advisory board to take in a representative from Women for Independence, for example, Radical Independence Campaign, Academics for Yes, and other groups who actually took part, so that you can have a kind of board for direction of the campaign.
And to move it on to another area of the referendum, and something that's still the case now, the fact that the mainstream media is quite clearly against the idea of Scottish independence. Obviously, people are moving more and more over to social media, but how can we combat that in the future? Because I'm pretty sure if there was another referendum or next week, it would be the same thing again from the BBC and from most of the major outlets.
Well, I'm not sure we can do very much about the BBC, quite frankly. I mean, it was very proved conclusively. It's a very British establishment organisation. But let's take the rest of the mainstream media, and you're quite right. Although social media is now very helpful, something we didn't have in the 1979 referendum, let me tell you, now it's enormously helpful. But the mainstream media actually sets the agenda on a day-to-day basis. I'm not as pessimistic as most people are about it. I'll tell you what happened during the last referendum. Peter Kearney and I went along to meet the editor and deputy editor of the Daily Record and also the Herald. When we met the Daily Record, they were very nice and cup of tea and all the rest of it, and said very fairly, we reckon about 30% of our readership is for no. We told them that you're missing something at the moment. It's below the radar of the mainstream media. Something's happening at ground level which you're not aware of. One of the reasons they're not aware of, to be fair to them, is that they do not now have the number of journalists employed that they would say were there 10, 15 years ago. So they're stretched much thinner, and the ability to send people out to the kind of Yes meetings we were having with huge attendances just wasn't available to them in budgetary terms. But I remember saying to the Record, yeah, that's probably right, probably about 30, 70